Chair Martin, I think we can go ahead and get started. I think our other two subcommittee members are probably just running a little late. I know that Al Forsberg had a conflict, so why don't we go ahead and get started with the introductory components.
Great, thank you. And thanks everyone. This is the first meeting of the Subcommittee for Pilot Program Implementation. The pilot program, as everyone knows, to sort of test out the revised Environmental Assessment Worksheet that includes climate information. And I'm going to call the meeting to order. Thank you to everyone for participating. I see my name is Nick Martin. I'm a public member on the EQB representing Congressional District 6. I see we have some members of the public on the line, so thank you for taking the time to give us your feedback, and also a number of state agency folks. Thank you for taking the time to participate in this project. So I'm going to give some introductory comments, but first just wanted to ask the other subcommittee members to introduce themselves as well. Maybe we'll go first to you, Commissioner Arnold.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Arnold. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Commerce. I will note that I have a conflict during a portion of this meeting, and Luis Miltich on my team will be representing the department for a portion of the meeting. So thank you to Luis for jumping in my stead and allowing the work to continue.
Chair Member Konar-Steenberg.
Sure. Mehmet Konar-Steenberg, public member. Thank you, Nick, for being our chair today. I really appreciate it.
And then do we have Member Yawaki on yet?
I do believe he is here. Ben, if you can hear us, we're having trouble hearing you. Maybe try again now. We'll see if we can get these detail or this technical glitch worked out. He does appear to be here, but we're not getting an audio connection right now.
Okay. And then Member Forsberg is not here yet. Is that right?
That's correct. He's running from another meeting, so he said he might just be a few minutes late. So we'll watch for him to sign on. Good.
And I'm missing anyone else? I think that's our committee, right? Great. Okay. Well, thank you all again. I wanted to just give brief kind of opening remarks about what we're here today to do. And then I'll hand off to the EQB staff. As you know, the purpose of this pilot program, which the board approved in its September meeting, is to test out the new Environmental Assessment Worksheet that now includes two types of climate information, guidance to projects and RGUs on developing carbon footprints. So a lot of sort of greenhouse gas footprint related questions. And then secondly, guidance or new questions related to assessing climate impacts, resilience, and adaptation in the location of our project. So those are our new additions to the EAW, and the board in September approved a pilot project running from January to through next fall to sort of test out those the implementation of the new form, working with RGUs and project proposers. We're not here now to talk about whether EQB should be doing a pilot program. There were some members of the public that were urging EQB to sort of go ahead and implement the form without a pilot, and others who were, and we're also not here to talk about sort of not making these changes to the EAW form, because I think really both of those issues were settled in the process that led up to the September meeting. there will be an EAW form requiring projects to address climate information that gets adopted by the board by next September. That was part of the resolution. However, what is within scope for this project, this pilot project, is really to, to test the best way to do that and how to get good climate information, as efficiently and effectively as possible at a reasonable sort of cost and amount of work for both RGUs and project proposers. So that's really the goal of this pilot project. And in terms of the goal of this committee, the Subcommittee on Pilot Program Implementation, which was approved at the October EQB meeting, is really intended to guide the staff on guide EQB staff on implementing this pilot program. Think about evaluation metrics. What kind of information do we want to collect in the course of the pilot? Report back to the ARIS committee and to the board overall on the pilot program. And we will be convened as a committee from now, technically from November meeting through next December, when the pilot program will run through next fall, next September or so, but next December, the board will act again on an updated EAW form. And I think my understanding is that EAW form may look like it does now, or it might look different, because we're certainly interested through this pilot project to learn things about how best to get this kind of information. So what we're going to do today for the majority of the meeting is hear from staff, primarily from Denise and Katie, on sort of the structure and design of the pilot program. Denise is going to talk to us primarily about process questions. How should this pilot program be designed? How should we recruit participants? Those kind of questions. We will be meeting at our next meeting on December 9th. We will be getting probably more deeply into questions around how do we define effectiveness of the revised EAW form? What should our evaluation metrics be? Those kind of questions. We can certainly start to talk about those a little bit today, but I just wanted to reassure people there will be plenty more time to talk about those in the second meeting, the December 9th meeting. So with that, unless there's any questions from my fellow subcommittee members or things from staff that I neglected to say, I think I'm going to turn it over to Katie to walk through the logistics of the meeting. But before I do that, let me just pause to see if anyone has questions or additions to what I said so far. Great. Okay. Well, Katie, over to you then to talk through logistics.
Perfect. Thanks, Chair Martin. And before I talk about logistics, one quick public service announcement, if we could go forward to the next slide. I do want to remind folks that are joining us that we have some open board member seats. We are accepting applications for congressional districts 1, 2, 7, and 8. And so just want to make people aware, if they haven't heard this already, there's a link in the chat where you can find out more information about these board seats on our website. Or feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, but we appreciate your help spreading the word. Our current members are able to reapply, and I know that some are considering whether they want to reapply or not, so there might be some openings, and we appreciate your help spreading the word on that. Great. So just to touch base on the logistics today. So, members of the subcommittee, these meetings are meant to feel a little bit like a workshop where we're coming to you with some thoughts and some initial design ideas, but giving you all the opportunity to shape it and take this in directions that you want, as well as hearing input from the public and others who are joining us that will help us steer this in the right direction. So that said, subcommittee members, feel free to use the raise hand feature to jump in when you have questions or have a comment to share. Chair Martin, we will, as staff, be kind of monitoring that hand raise. I know it's hard to keep track of everything in these virtual environments. We'll monitor that hand raise and just flag it if we see a hand shoot up, or feel free, you know, we're small enough subcommittee members that if you just want to jump in, just go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in as well. Like we said, you'll be hearing from staff, but then there'll be time for conversation, you know, sort of all along the way. And let's see, the other thing I just wanted to remind you of is some of the things that are helpful when we have this conversation is when you do speak, to just introduce yourself or say who's speaking. Sometimes we can't see everybody's camera view on all at once, and when we are having those discussion periods, it's helpful to turn your camera on. So members of the public, thank you for being here today and for following this process and giving your input along the way. So we do have a dedicated time in the agenda for a public comment period, and if you're interested in giving a comment to the board and chiming in the discussion, please use the raised hand feature to indicate that you would like to do so. And the slide in front of you shows where that is. If you're on your computer, you'll navigate to the participants list, and then next to your name, you'll see a little hand that you can raise. And if you're joining via phone, there's you have to go to the three dots, and that'll get you to the hand raise feature. So again, for the sake of kind of our agenda, we're having public comment come at a particular point in the agenda, but we definitely hope that there could be kind of a conversational feel to parts of this meeting today. If you have any technical difficulties, please, by all means, give us a call, or you can email us. We can put that information in the chat. So if you're trying to connect and you're not able to, let us know. So those are the logistics for today. And Chair Martin, I will pass it back to you to introduce our presenter.
Great, thank you. And I see that Member Forsberg has joined now. Alan, if you could introduce yourself, and then I don't know if we can try again for Member Iwaki. I'm not sure we couldn't get him before.
Yes, good afternoon on this beautiful day in southern Minnesota. Sorry about being a little late. I was working in Redwood Falls this morning and just arrived back at my home. I'm a public member from Congressional District Number 1, southern Minnesota.
Great, thank you.
I think we can go ahead and try. Ben, are you able to unmute now? And let's see if we can hear you. Shoot, Ben, we still aren't able to get, I see you unmuting. We're gonna try, just hold on, sit tight for 1 second. We're trying a trick that our staff member Katrina knows that worked before. So let's try this again. Okay. Ben, go ahead and try it one more time and see if it's working. Still no luck. So we're having a little bit more tricky technical difficulty. So we'll continue on, but continue to work on that and see if we can't get that audio.
Okay, great. Well, I'd like to hand it over to Denise, who is the EQB's director of the Environmental Review Program. Denise Wilson is going to walk us through the sort of proposed pilot program implementation design with the understanding that this is just a first proposal, and Denise will talk about that.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the subcommittee. For members of the audience, my name is Denise Wilson, and as the chair just mentioned, I work for the Environmental Quality Board as the director of the State Environmental Review Program. And this afternoon, I'm going to provide some ideas for what elements could be included in the design and implementation of the pilot program that will assess the effectiveness of the climate information that will be included on the draft revised Environmental Assessment Worksheet form. Next slide, Eric. The proposed design and implementation elements include a recruitment strategy, engagement opportunities for both pilot program participants and other environmental review program participants, as well as expectations for pilot program participants. Next slide, please. So EQB staff are in the process of developing an approach for recruiting pilot program participants. We are looking for a wide range of governmental units from across the state, both in the metro and outstate. Recruitment will continue through July of 2022. That way, we will have the highest likelihood for including as many environmental review projects as possible in the data that we will collect. Registration for the pilot program will be limited to state agencies, local governments, and consultants. Messages will be posted on the EQB website, in the EQB Monitor, and through social media. We will reach out through emails and phone campaigns targeted through historic EQB data. And we will also make requests through associations that work with local governments to include notices in their newsletters. Next slide, please. So registration is currently active on the EQB webpage. Over the last few EQB monitors, we've been including a link that provides the opportunity to register. And so far, that's resulted in 8 consultants that have registered, 8 local units of government, and 6 state agencies. And after we implement the strategies for recruitment, we hope to increase this to as many local governments and state agencies and consultants that are interested in participating. There is no limit to the number of organizations that can register. Next slide, please.
Could I make a comment at this point, Chairman?
Sure.
Denise?
Oh.
I see the list of local governments, and the counties in greater Minnesota, many of them do not have environmental staff. Many of them don't have projects that require an EAW very often. And I'm wondering if there isn't a different way of getting input from them. I'm recalling the testimony we got from AMC during the public involvement. And I'm wondering if they could represent, if AMC could have a participant to represent those smaller greater Minnesota counties.
Mr. Chair, I think we're open to any and all ideas and suggestions.
I don't think you're going to get any or very many pilot projects from, well, there's 87 counties in the state. There's the metro counties and there's regional center counties. They've got the capacity. They have EAWs coming through. You'll probably get pilot projects from them, but I don't see you getting pilot projects from those other more rural counties. A way to get input from them would be through AMC, their county organization.
Well, thank you, Subcommittee Member Forsberg and Mr. Chair and subcommittee members. That is one of the strategies that we've identified in our recruitment efforts, is to identify those organizations and make requests through their newsletters to encourage participation and registration.
Yeah, what I'm suggesting though is there would be an AMC staff person that would be asked to join to represent those greater Minnesota counties.
Okay.
They have a transportation environmental person that could do that if they chose, or if we chose.
Member Forsberg, could you just spell out AMC for those on the phone who might not know what that is?
Association of Minnesota Counties.
Thank you.
The other thought too is with project proposers, you may get pilot information from them, but they're going to be the big companies that would have an interest in this. The Chamber of Commerce provided testimony. If we could consider having the Chamber of Commerce have a person to represent all those smaller businesses out there, middle-sized businesses.
So, Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Forsberg, I think we have to keep in mind that the intent of the pilot program is to implement, to encourage participation for governmental units who are implementing the EAW form, so that they can try it out and get support while they're completing the elements of the form, and then provide feedback on their experience. And one of the things that we'll talk about at a future meeting is sort of what information we would gather in order to understand the effectiveness of that additional climate information. And I think part of the challenge might be that if we have organizations that aren't actually going through the process of filling out the form and that experience, how might we get that information?
I understand that, but what I'm speaking to is getting a representative sample of folks out there, not just the big counties and big businesses and consultants, but a much broader group.
Okay, we can definitely figure out a way to make sure that we engage with those types of organizations.
Good,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I'll just chime in, Board Member Forsberg. We certainly have, county associations, city associations. There's associations of the small cities and greater Minnesota counties. Those associations are all part of the plan that, we want to reach out to folks and let them know that this is happening, and ask how they would like to be involved and how they would like to get input. Whether registering for the pilot is the best, fit, we can start that out, but we are absolutely, share your goal of getting wide and broad input from, RGUs that, potentially have, that are doing the EAW frequently and have that perspective, and the ones that aren't doing it very often and have that very different perspective. So we absolutely share your view that the broader, diversity of input that we can get will strengthen where this is going. Just to reiterate again, the organizations that you've listed are already on our list as kind of our December outreach, touch points that we want to touch base with.
Yeah. Good, thank you.
And actually that goes to, next slide, please. So to support and engage with the participants during the pilot program, we are proposing to convene monthly collaborative forums that will be limited to pilot program participants and include technical and subject matter expert speakers. And the reason that we tried to focus in on just including those pilot program participants in the collaborative forums is to for them to come together and have transparent conversations and support each other as they go through the process and do some shared learning and a safe space to do that. We hope to provide, or we plan to provide access to EQB staff to respond to technical questions as governmental units fill out the form. And then when we see the opportunity to connect with others who have similar questions, and maybe convene some sector specific groups to kind of work through some ideas and issues and concerns for responding based on those sector specific needs. And then we also plan to provide access to available information and resources on the EQB project webpage for the pilot program participants. In addition to other interested environmental review program participants, to make sure that they can engage and stay up to date with how the pilot program is progressing, we encourage them to attend the board meetings and environmental review implementation subcommittee meetings, where this subcommittee will provide progress updates. We encourage anyone who's interested in this process to submit comments during public comment periods on projects that are undergoing review and using the draft revised EAW form. We encourage them to provide feedback directly to EQB staff as they go through the process, or they observe things that are of interest or ideas where they think improvements can be made. And then we also are committed to providing access to available resources and information on the EQB project webpage that may have a broader interest. Next slide, please. So we recognize that governmental units, state agencies and local governmental units are really busy and don't have a lot of time to do a lot of extra work and participate in the pilot program. So we are trying to strike a balance with participant expectations. We're asking for registered participants to commit to using the draft revised EAW form when relevant, to participate in the collaborative forums and share information on their experience, and to support other pilot program participants and be available as a resource when possible, and provide information that's requested by the subcommittee for pilot program implementation so that we can track their experiences and receive meaningful feedback that will inform the future decision on what elements are included on the EAW form. So this is our draft framework, and we're eager to consider whether we are missing any elements or if there are suggestions that will improve the design and implementation of this pilot program beyond the elements that we've presented today. So thank you.
Yeah, Dennis, or Denise, Dennis, I'm sorry. Denise, will this information from the participants be brought to this subcommittee?
Yes. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Forsberg. So right now, the plan is, and we can talk about this, I think this is specifically the focus of the December 9th meeting will be on what information will be gathered, and as the chair suggested, how to define effectiveness and how to develop metrics where we use that information to sort of gauge that effectiveness on the information on the EAW form. And so the plan would be to, collect that data through the end of September, and then compile that information, bring it back to the subcommittee before it goes to the full board for a vote. And that would be used to develop recommendations for any changes that might be needed to the EAW form before it goes forward to a vote.
Right, looking down the road a long ways, and of course, former county engineers are always looking down the road. At some point, I would think our subcommittee will be asked to go to the ERIS and then the full board with recommendations on what changes should be made, should it be implemented. So I think the metrics you refer to, are they going to be the yardstick that we use to decide if this has been successful, and if not, what changes need to be made?
So, Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Forsberg, I think that's up to the subcommittee to decide what metrics, what the metrics are, what information is needed, and how you all will use that information to inform your decision making.
And when we get to that point, I think it would be appropriate to ask the participants in the pilot project if they have ideas for improvement and what their thoughts are, if they have ideas for alternative ways to accomplish this climate change awareness.
Yeah, thanks, Member Forsberg. I do think it'll be really important for us with the staff, as a committee and with the staff, to really define these metrics well, because we really need to, we need to think through what we hope to learn over the course of the next months, 9 months or whatever it is, and what are the metrics that would be a good way to judge if we're getting good information sort of cost effectively, right? And also being, realizing that the participants will be doing, they're already going to be doing a lot of new work to answer questions, and to use tools. And then we're going to be asking them to do some work to track certain metrics to report to us. So I think we need to, understand that's added time for them. And we want to sort of make sure that the information we're asking them to track is really getting at the questions that we're trying to answer. That's just an observation. I think that's, you know, in some ways in the spirit of what you're saying, Member Forsberg, as well.
As if I could make just one more remark, I think we have to even back up and look at this from a higher altitude. And from my brief experience with the board, as I understand, the purpose of an EAW is to be a brief worksheet providing useful information to decision makers on the existing environment at the project and project environmental effects. So when we come up with this revised EAW, does it better meet that purpose?
Mr. Chair and Subcommittee Member Forsberg, I just have to sort of expand that definition. So the purpose of the EAW is actually in rule. And if you go by the very literal translation of the rule, it is to make a determination on the need for an EIS specifically. However, if you go back to the objectives that are defined in rule for the environmental review program, the objectives of all the processes are to provide usable information to members of the public, government decision makers, and project proposers. And so I think we have to broaden that understanding of who are the users of this information.
Right. There's also language about the EAW being effective and efficient.
Right, I agree. And I think we're gonna, you know, spend some time trying to define those terms and make sure our metrics track them. Let me ask just whether any of the other subcommittee members have clarifying questions or comments. I don't know. I'm not sure Commissioner Arnold is still on, but I know that Member Connor Steenberg is.
Yes, I have questions. Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Just two questions. The first is, Denise, you had referred to in the previous slide, you talked about convening forums for the participants to talk to each other. And I just had a question about whether it sounded from the way you were describing those that perhaps those would not be open to the public, but I wondered if you could clarify that and whether, I don't know if there's an open meeting law issue with not allowing the public into those kinds of sessions. I don't know, but just that's one question. And then the other question is on the current slide that we're looking at now, that first bullet point, use the draft revised EAW form, and you kind of leaned into the phrase when relevant. And I'm wondering if you can explain what you mean by relevant. When would it not be relevant to use this draft EAW form?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair and Subcommittee Member Connor Steenberg. So the first question, I don't know, Eric, can you go back to the previous slide? So the pilot program, the collaborative forums were designed to have a place for pilot program participants to sort of come together collectively because they're all going through similar experiences and they have an opportunity to sort of share their experiences. And so the reason that we didn't open it up to the public is that sometimes people go through greater understanding or they may make comments or come to some conclusions and through deliberation come to a different outcome. And so, as you can imagine, some of this work is very political. And so having those transparent conversations where there's sort of that enhanced growth and learning, we wanted to create a safe space for that to get to the best outcome in a collaborative way. And so as far as open meeting law, I think that is only specific to sort of boards and committees that are convened. This wouldn't necessarily be a committee. It would be more just an opportunity. We would host these events, but it would be up to individual participants on whether or not they would attend. And we would hope that they would bring issues forward for discussion. And so right now the vision, and again, this is just a straw proposal per se. We're open, and if you have better ideas or think that a better way would get us at the better outcome, you know, that we're open and willing to implement, you know, whatever you think is best. But in this context, we had hoped to have sort of speakers of, you know, other environmental review program participants come forward and sort of maybe organizations that will be users of this information, they could come forward and talk to program participants and explain to them how they might use the information. So there might be some shared understanding between, you know, the government units producing the information and, you know, others, consumers of the information, to help them expand sort of what's possible and maybe really refine the elements to get at the best outcome. So that's the first question. Is that helpful? Okay, and so now the next slide, Eric. So your second question was when relevant. And the reason I added that sort of caveat is that just because an RGU goes through the pilot program, it doesn't mean they give up their discretion, right? So that the EAW form is really a guide and a prompt that is designed to identify information that is useful and needed in order to respond to a decision on the need for an EIS. And that decision is based on criteria and rule. And while this form applies to all projects across the state, regardless of project type or the nature and location of a specific project, that we didn't want to make it as a situation where, you know, just because you signed up, an RGU would lose their discretion to make a determination on which of the elements in the form, or even if the form was just not relevant to a specific project. And so they would be able to use the discretion. And there really isn't a method that we could use that would say, under all circumstances, if you register, you have to use this form. So I didn't want to create the expectation that that was going to happen through the pilot program.
Thank you for that explanation. I'm still thinking about that,
Okay.
and I'll continue to try to think about that question of relevance, because it's hard for me to imagine a situation where climate impacts would not be part of the relevant calculus. But I'll keep an open mind and keep thinking about that.
Great, thank you. I want to go to, I think, Member Yawaki, I think you have your hand raised, and I hope we can hear you now if you have a question. Still have audio problems.
And unfortunately, we still aren't able to hear you. If you check your email, I did send a call-in number as another option, but you can also put as a stopgap while we're getting this worked out. If you have a question or a comment, you can put it in the chat, and we could at least get that out there.
Okay, we'll give Ben a chance to try dialing in or putting comments in the chat. We're going to go we're a little ahead of schedule, and we'll go pretty soon to public comment. I think we have maybe some folks who want to speak. So just say that to, you know, others who might want to speak in the public comment period. Start thinking about that. Before we do that, I just wanted to see if there are any other clarifying questions or comments from the subcommittee members. We will come back after the public comment to more discussion among the subcommittee members, including on what you heard here during the public comment. So anything else from folks who are on, from committee members rather?
Yes, if I could, Chairman.
Yes.
It would have been helpful to see this information in advance before our meeting so we could consider it before our discussion. For instance, the EQB meetings, we will have an agenda and we'll have a mail out of material ahead of time that we can look at before we have our actual board meeting.
Yeah, I agree. I've been sort of scrolling notes rather quickly, but maybe that's something we can do for upcoming meetings. Have a slide deck sent out ahead of time to the subcommittee. That would be great.
The other thing I'd like to comment on is having been on RGU and worked with this. It's one thing to say the RGU has the discretion to do the EAW or not do it and what items to include in it. But that's not really true. And from a practical standpoint, there are many pressures on the RGU as to whether they do an EAW or not and how it's done. For instance, you cannot get a DNR waters permit unless where one is needed, unless you've done an EAW and they like it. So the discretion isn't 100%. Freedom isn't 100%, I guess. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Forsberg, that's an accurate statement. In the rules, there are mandatory categories that determine when an EAW is required and when an EIS is required. And so I didn't mean to infer that that it was discretion for when review is required, but rather discretion for what information is included on the EAW form based on the nature and location of that project and what is relevant to the decision using the criteria in rule.
I guess I have one other question, Director Wilson, for you. What are your thoughts? So you talked about in the collaborative forums, some of the time would be devoted to hearing from subject matter experts. What are your thoughts so far on what, not necessarily specific people, but what kind of people? I know that, in the guidance for the forum, there's a lot of tools for carbon footprinting and there's a lot of tools for climate impacts. And I'm imagining you would try to have some people that could sort of walk participants through some of those tools. But what are you thinking about that?
Absolutely. So we would look at all the resources that are out there and see if we could get speakers from organizations that put together those tools. We've also reached out to the Climate Registry. They do a lot of work in helping identify sources of greenhouse gas emissions and types of gases and how to quantify those emissions. So we had asked them if they could come and just sort of give a primer that might be helpful at a very beginner level on starting that conversation. And then actually we asked them to review our guidance document and they did and offered us some helpful tips before we went forward. So they've been a good partner. I can imagine reaching out to folks at the University of Minnesota. They have strong resources and also we met with them during the engagement process for the draft recommendations. They were very helpful and other folks like that. But I could also see NGOs, like I mentioned earlier, coming forward and consumers of the information to sort of let folks know what they find is helpful and usable information.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I mean, I think that so both categories of things, the carbon footprinting tools and the climate models are, they're somewhat specialized, right? Like you can, I did a little experimenting myself with the climate impact tools, and I thought they were actually quite useful and fairly user friendly, but I think, that's obviously really specialized expertise. So someone like a university person who could help those feel more accessible and usable would be really valuable. And then the same thing on the footprinting side. I feel like the guidance has done a good job of putting out a lot of tools, but it hasn't necessarily given sort of a step-by-step, use this one for your project, not those other ones, and here's how you use it step by step. So I think anything that can get the project proposers and RGUs a little closer to feeling like it's a clear step-by-step process and there are resources available to them will be really helpful. That's more a comment than a question, clarifying question, sorry. Okay, unless there's any other comments or questions from subcommittee members, Director Pratt, should we go to the public comment period, or I'll defer to you?
Yeah, and just on a logistical note, members of the public, we're not sure if the hand raise feature is working right. This must be our day. WebEx always throws a new a new challenge at us. So we're not seeing hands raised at this point, but if you can use the hand raise feature, do that, or you can chat at us via the chat box, and we'll make sure that you get noticed. And I see one hand raised right now. And members of the public, if you don't raise your hand, we'll start asking questions to you. We have a list of questions. So yeah, but we do have one hand raised. Oh, we have a couple now. So Chair Martin, I can just read off the list. We have our first commenter is Amelia Voss. Amelia, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and give your comments. And introduce yourself when you unmute. Actually, we have to unmute you. Sorry. There, you should be unmuted now.
Okay, perfect. I was just about to chat you that I couldn't unmute myself, which, you know, for some of you that might be an advantage just to keep me on mute. But well, great. Thank you so much, Chair Martin and subcommittee members. I have just a few off the cuff thoughts based on the discussion today that I'd like to share. And, you know, I think one of the biggest things I'm thinking about as you design this pilot is just, and I've said this before, but just a transparency element, knowing that there's going to be meetings that aren't open to the public. And I understand, you know, the desire to create a safe space for some conversations to happen, but knowing that those meetings aren't going to be open to the public, there does need to be a good chain of transparency that helps the public understand how whatever the ultimate decisions that are reached about how the climate analysis looks and what the form looks like, the public needs to be able to trace how we got there from where we're starting from. And so I think, you know, the web page is really important, but, you know, making sure that there's transparency between where we're starting from and where we end up, to create that credibility for the public, because they're not going to be able to see what goes on behind the scenes. The second piece is who's participating in the cohort. And I think the discussion on this amongst the subcommittee was strong, but I would echo, I believe, Ms. Wilson's statement that, you know, you're trying to limit the participation to people who are actually doing environmental review. You know, I have concerns that once we start bringing in certain organizational entities, then, you know, I want a seat at the table too. So, you know, I think that participation really does need to be limited to those RGUs and project proposers and the consultants who are actually doing the environmental review. And then my third piece of feedback is that I would really like to see some opportunity to gather, once you know, proceed through the pilot and get to this stage of sort of reflecting and data gathering about how it went. I think there should be a component of gathering information from the public. The public is going to be commenting on these EAWs through the public comment process, but environmental review is a two-sided process. It's maybe it's even a triangle: the project proposer, the RGU, and the public. And so I think it's really important that you get feedback from public participants about how it was for them to interact with the form, you know, and you could do that by you know, reaching out to people who had commented on EAWs that have gone through the pilot. But I think gathering some information from the public is really important to make sure you have the full picture when you're reflecting on the success of the pilot. And then my last comment is just about kind of the scope of what we're doing here. And I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page that, you know, environmental review has evolved quite a bit since it was established in the 70s. The EAW form has evolved quite a bit. And, you know, we're not going to fix every everybody's qualms with environmental review in this process. It's focused specifically on climate. So I want to make sure that even though I know that a lot of people wish that the EAW process was more streamlined and more efficient, I don't think that that's something that this process is designed to do. We're focused on climate, and the climate analysis needs to be doable and feasible and useful, but you know, this process isn't to fix other bigger picture problems with environmental review, and I want to make sure that the climate analysis doesn't get short shrift because people have other broader concerns with the EAW process or environmental review in general. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot for those, Amelia. Really useful. Let's, Denise, let's kind of put a pin in this question of, because I think both Member Forsberg and Amelia Voss made legitimate points around, you know, the tension between, like, on the one hand, like, there's really value to have only entities that are doing EAWs participating because they're kind of going through the process together, right? And at the same time, I really heard what Member Forsberg said around the fact that, like, there's a lot of entities that don't have a person that can devote to this, especially if they're not doing an EAW at the moment, but also want to learn and have input to the process. So I'm not sure the best way to strike that balance, but I think that's a useful thing to just sort of flag to think more about.
So, Mr. Chair, one of the ideas that we've sort of been discussing and really haven't fleshed out too much is the idea of maybe putting a survey on our website so that members of the public, if they have gone through the process, could weigh in and we could track their experiences too. So that might be a way at allowing folks to sort of provide direct information to in response to their experience, but also, you know, we invite them to send messages like emails or directly contact us too. And EQB staff are open to maybe convening groups outside of just these collaborative forums. There may be a space where we could convene organizations around focus groups or things like that as we get more information and feedback that they can help us, and it can be an adaptive approach.
Okay, well, we don't have to answer it now, and I don't want to, like, distract from we're in the public comment now, but just something to flag that might need more thought, I think.
Sure.
So I think we have another hand up. Sorry, I don't mean to. Yasmin is supposed to be coordinating this process. I'm not trying to jump in and tee up the public commenters.
It's okay, don't worry about it.
Yeah, go ahead.
It looks like the next commenter is Lucas Sjostrom. You're unmuted, Lucas.
Pronunciation on a state call I've ever heard. Well done. So thank you. Yes, Lucas Sjostrom, Minnesota Milk Producers Association, and I appreciate Denise's comments earlier. I think on a earlier subcommittee in which I participated, which was open to the public, and like really, we're in a situation, at least as dairy farmers, our farms are open to the public and people can come drive by anytime, and that's not really an issue. The issue is that if we can kind of figure stuff out with whoever wants to be involved behind the scenes, I think we can make a lot of progress on agreement, not for any interest, but just understanding each other. So I think those were well-founded comments, and thank you for that. But actually, my original comment, all I wanted to say was just, I think I don't want to speak for everyone, but at least from my perspective, and I think what I'm hearing from the agricultural community is there is just a lot going on in climate right now. And I realize this is a pilot, but I've had 3 meetings already this week with state entities related to climate. And I realize EQB touches all of them, but there's stuff going on with EQB, stuff going on outside of EQB. And of course, there's a bill, especially with agriculture and forestry, with the infrastructure bill at the federal level that will affect climate and just what's possible and what's not possible. And so I would just caution it, or maybe, yeah, I think caution is the right word to the subcommittee members and the board overall, that making this pilot, making sure it's all encompassing so that people aren't getting 15 different directions on what's good for the quote unquote climate is really important, because we are at a time of large gray area and time of real uncertainty on what's expected from our customers, from regulatory, from our neighbors, and what we believe is best for the land, the air, the climate. Those things aren't matching up right now, and I don't think that's toward any malice. I think it's unsettled science and unsettled regulatory standards. So I just wanted to throw that out for the subcommittee to hopefully appreciate as they move forward. And thanks everyone for your work.
Okay, thank you.
At
Don't
this
know
time,
if I can't see if we have, sorry, go ahead, Yasmin.
At this time, I don't see any other hands raised. So if you do have your hand raised and we can't see it, please write your name in the chat and we will unmute you. But if it is the case that we don't have any hands raised, I suggest that the public, think about some of the comments that we've had here and feel free to jump in.
This is Katie, and I'll just add, don't be shy. This is an important time where we can, have this conversation and just hear what's on your mind. I think this is an informative discussion so far, and appreciate the commenters and appreciate the subcommittee members bringing ideas forward. So, feel free to chime in if you have other thoughts or perspectives.
And I guess some specific questions there to get people thinking might be around beyond what you heard Director Wilson present. Do you have other ideas around how elements of the project design, recruitment, engagement that seem to be missing, or other ways that you think we might meaningfully engage people, including are there other ways to engage folks who are outside of the pilot program participants? So just as a little sort of motivator of any thoughts others might have about that.
Yep, Mr. Martin, Chairman
Yes.
Martin. I was interested in Lucas's comments on climate change and it being approached perhaps in different ways by different state agencies, and concerned that it be approached in a different way by the EQB. I know that a large dairy farm at a certain threshold needs permits from DNR and EQB, EAW. Are you concerned that these aren't consistent, Lucas, or they're contradictory? Or are you concerned that this is just adding another layer of complexity and difficulty to expanding a dairy farm?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not quite sure who spoke, but appreciate you asking the question. Yeah, well, first, it goes back to our definition of large, right? The reason we're in this boat is because somebody 20 years ago decided that 715 cows was this magic number. And there's a lot of families who are basically just looking at this environmental review and the cost, and they are at 714 cows, and they can't add one more because they don't want to pay a consultant $60,000 to $100,000 to jump through hoops or look bad by their neighbors. So that's one thing. Number two, climate puts a number on their backs, even though it's been there the whole time. Something we want to work on. But to address the question directly, what I've seen so far in our case, RGU's MPCA, and I'm sure there's several from MPCA on the line, as they were on a different call this morning and as they were on other calls yesterday. But then, and they're measuring certain things, mostly related to manure, because that's what MPCA measures or regulates, or whatever you want to call it. But there's lots of other factors that MPCA doesn't regulate, like the emissions in the country of India or Mexico compared to ours. You know, the economic development that we could create in a local community versus them crossing the border into South Dakota or Iowa or Nebraska and doing this exact same thing elsewhere. And then there's the trade-off of water use and electricity and compressed natural gas, if you see methane as a positive rather than a negative. So there's all these different things that your climate, obviously our climate affects the whole planet, but at the same time, your climate impact doesn't always fit well with whatever rules come out from a government agency. So that's the trade-offs I'm talking about. It's way too abstract to tell you this is right and this is wrong, but depending on your I think people miss out in terms of farms. And again, I've argued feedlots should be exempted from this for the science that's forthcoming from the UN and other places. But some people own all of their land when they start a farm. Some people own only the land that the animals sit on. Some people have a very good ratio of manure to land availability. Some people have a ratio they would probably love to increase and aren't able to do so for financial or other reasons. And anytime we put up a barrier to helping people be better in terms of climate and be better in terms of all other things, environmental review, loopholes are found, and people just give up, whether that's, hey, I'm going to stay at 714 cows, or hey, I'm going to absolve this problem by using commercial fertilizer and get rid of the cows. So these are the trade-offs I'm talking about. I hope that made sense, but I do appreciate the question.
Well, it was Al Forsberg, member, making the question. One thing I would add to that too, that I brought up in the past, is what are the net effects with the cows, for instance? I think most people accept that dairy is a healthful, good product. What's the net effect of having two farms with 350 cows each, where no permits or no EAW is required, versus having one with 714 cows? Is the methane emissions the same?
And again, I don't want to paint too broad of a brush. I think the answer to your question, and that's why you asked it. Generally speaking, the answer is going to be I hate to say larger is more efficient, because that's not true, but two equal farms will likely find efficiencies in one equal farm that's larger. But we don't live in a world where there's piecemeal 350 cow farms around the state that can just combine. There's social issues and other things people need to deal with. I think, especially in terms of climate, Member Forsberg, your questions are right on. We need to look worldwide, and what we're really talking about here is putting up walls in Minnesota that would create opportunity elsewhere, because again, as I've shared before in other testimony, there are cows that are going to leave other places and they're going to go to the places where the climate resources are best. And I believe that's here in the upper Midwest for the next 10 to 20 years. And we can decide whether we get to take part in that or not. And yes, it is my selfish job to try to find more cows in Minnesota, but it's also the best thing for the climate, honestly. As someone who studied this, it's not a self-drawn conclusion if we put barriers in the way.
One thought too is we don't want to put farmers with 714 cows in the position of praying for a single calf instead of twins and put them over the limit.
Well, and you're joking, I think, to some extent, Member Forsberg, but people are making these choices right now, and you probably know it. I mean, People buy heifer yards in a different township and that sort of thing to create more inefficient lives for themselves, more inefficient climate situations, more inefficient regulatory oversight, frankly, because their county feedlot officers are looking at 2 places instead of 1. But just to, and this isn't climate, but this is environmental review altogether. And that's just not good. And people assume other places are the same, and they're very much not. I mean, you look at Wisconsin, California, our environmental review program, as was stated before, started long before these permits were in place. And I've had several farmers tell me there's not, unfortunately, been much improvement to their plans in any environmental manner through environmental review. It's all caught through the feedlot and their private processes, basically. And climate, carbon, all of this generally works in tandem with agricultural business principles today, thank God. I don't think that was maybe the case 40, 50 years ago, but today a well-run feedlot operation is a well-run, from a climate perspective, feedlot operation.
So I want to jump in because these are all really legitimate concerns, but I do keep thinking, you know, that the scope of this pilot project is limited. You know, it is not about whether the large versus small dairy threshold is the right one, or changing other aspects of the environmental review program. We're really limited in this project to, you know, are we creating the tools for, to stick with your example of dairy farmers, you know, to get good greenhouse gas impact information and good climate information that's useful to them and useful to the folks permitting their projects, and how can we do that sort of most cost effectively. And so I think we won't be able to answer all of the issues that you're addressing within this pilot. Some of the issues that you talked about really have to do with emission leakage to other states or other countries. It's possible the tools can get at leakage, but they're not going to be able to get at, you know, the sort of larger dynamics. So I just want to keep us focused on what the scope of the pilot project actually is. You know, granting that a lot of the issues that you've brought up are really important and legitimate for dairy farmers in Minnesota. I want to move us along just to check once more if there are any other public comments. If not, we will move back into subcommittee discussion after that. We do have a little bit more time for public comment if there is any. Okay, Katie, I don't hear anymore. Are you seeing anything, or Yasmin?
It looks like I see Amelia Voss. I see your hand up again, and I don't know if that's a holdover or if that's a new hand raised. We'll see if our team can go ahead and unmute you. Technical difficulties from our end. Hold tight.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Okay, great.
Okay, good. Just one other thought, you know, as I'm hearing this good dialogue, I think, you know, one possible use of the pilot program is to have some good discussions among different stakeholders about adding climate to environmental review and creating a greater understanding, you know, of where each other is coming from, you know, helping those of us who are public advocates understand the complexities and added costs for project proposers, and helping project proposers understand why, you know, those of us who are public commenters want this information and how we would use it. And so also just throwing out that maybe that's an opportunity for, you know, a couple broader sessions that include the pilot participants and some broader stakeholders, just to have maybe a couple sessions of dialogue to exchange amongst the people who participate in environmental review, but often aren't necessarily all in a room talking to each other about what's important.
So Ms. Voss, you're proposing a session somewhere in the sequence that is with members of the public who are interested in this information.
Yeah, I think, members of the public, or it could even be, groups, advocacy groups who are common players. I think it could be designed a number of different ways, but, just hearing Mr. Sjostrom speak, he and I are obviously on different ends of the spectrum in terms of how we think about engaging in environmental review, him from a project proposer standpoint, me from a public advocacy and environmental standpoint. And so just envisioning that it might be helpful to even gather some of the groups that are commonly representing interests in this process to have a dialogue about and share with each other, why we're advocating for what we're advocating for.
Chair Martin, if I can just chime in, that's a really interesting idea. And, generally what we see in EQB across many, many issue areas, not, beyond just environmental review, but the more we can get people talking, at that human level, really understanding where each other are coming from. At the end of the day, we see that people want a lot of the same things, right? They want thriving communities. They want access to opportunity for their families and their communities, and they want a healthy environment. We see that across issue areas, but then oftentimes the way that our political structures, our regulatory structures get set up, we get crossways of that kind of common understanding. And so I think we can take that back and think about how we might implement something like that. I think it is sometimes hard to get folks to come to the table for those type of dialogues because it does require a little bit of vulnerability and a little bit of sitting down with people you don't ordinarily sit down with. But we would welcome that. I see other folks on the call, representing counties. I think that would be a great perspective to bring in. So we'll think about that at the staff level. But I do generally think tough issues go better when we learn from each other and hear each other and just have that dialogue.
Yeah, thank you for that, Katie. Okay, if we have no more public comment, I want to move us back into a wrap-up period of further subcommittee discussion. That can be in reaction to things that you heard in the public comment period, further discussion of issues we were talking about then. If folks don't jump in, I have some, again, motivating questions, but I'll wait with those to see if any of the other subcommittee members want to jump in to react to what you heard.
I think this is Al Forsberg again. And what was valuable to me from Lucas's discussion was not each one of the issues he brought up, many of which are not under our purview. What was valuable to me is how complicated the system is. And our revised EAW has about 4,000 words, for instance, compared to the current one of 2,900 words. So we are talking about more time and more money. That does affect the competitive nature of dairy in Minnesota, and we need to consider that as well. So I thank you, Lucas, for bringing up all those issues, even though some of them we can't handle directly ourselves as the EQB.
Yeah, I think that's entirely a fair point, and I didn't mean to discount any of those concerns. I'm just sort of reminding folks what the scope of the program is versus the scope of the broader rules that Lucas was pointing to. So good points. Any others?
Mr. Chair, this is Mehmet.
Yeah, go ahead.
So just listening to this conversation, I'm also struck by something that's come up a couple of times, which is because there are so many issues adjacent to what we are doing here. Concerns about the efficacy of environmental review generally, concerns about, you know, the AW process generally, the EIS process generally, all kinds of adjacent issues. It seems to me that one of the things that as a subcommittee we're going to have to do, we're going to have to return to time and again, and you emphasize this yourself, Mr. Chair, is really reminding ourselves what this particular subcommittee's charge is. And our, you know, as I understand it, our subcommittee's charge, as much as we might like it to, like there to be some mission creep here, we are not tasked with trying to fix environmental review in Minnesota to the extent it needs fixing. We have a pretty narrow mission statement here, and I think it's going to be incumbent upon all of us, if we're going to make these meetings efficient and make this process work, that we keep reminding ourselves and reminding each other whenever we want to start talking about sort of some of the bigger picture issues, that no, we have a task here, and that task is to help to work with the staff hand in hand to design this pilot project in a way that tests the document that's being proposed, and that it's not to try to cure some of these larger issues that are significant issues for a lot of people, but are ones that are not really on our plates right now, as I understand it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Yeah. So. I wanted to ask, so I think just if Louise is still on, maybe she's not. I was going to try to give Louise a chance as a, oh yes, you are. If you wanted to, I know you're sort of standing in for Commissioner Arnold. If you have any thoughts that you wanted to share, I wanted to give you a chance to.
Sure, I do. I appreciate the chance, Mr. Chair. And I would second all of the things, the very thoughtful comments from you, committee member Conor Steenberg. I think that was very well said. I think keeping the focus is going to be pretty critical to making this effort efficient and getting something really robust that the RGUs can look to after the form is approved, particularly the local governmental units. I also had a couple other things, just two thoughts. You know, the first is I really appreciate the comments from Amelia Voss about transparency. I think that is really important, having kind of an ability for the public to be able to see how we got to where we arrive at the end. At the same time, I think Denise's point is very important about having kind of a safe space for the RGUs that are working through the EAW form to kind of gather. One suggestion I would make, and maybe the committee here can consider it, I think using the comments that come in on these EAWs in some kind of a systematic way might be a good way to get that kind of, at least measure the public reaction to what has happened in those maybe more intimate sessions where RGUs are sharing ideas with each other and kind of sharing resources, working on the best ways to do this kind of thing. So I think that we should look at the comments on EAWs as a really good resource. And I just wanted to flag also, I think, Denise, the word safe space, I think, is kind of helpful. One thing that I want to make sure we're cognizant of in creating that space is that we do want that kind of ability for the agencies to just meet together, particularly because as part of our environmental review processes, we've got public engagement steps, and I think it's pretty important not to create sort of a shadow public engagement opportunity, because I think it can get in, it may mess with the requirements that the individual agencies have around that public engagement. And I guess the last thought I'll share is that I do think consistency, to Lucas's point, consistency across agencies is always really important. And so I think it's critical to use the pilot as a way to get that consistency, a way to make sure that the agencies are talking to each other. So I think that should be a major focus. those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks, Ms. Miltich. Could you elaborate on the third point? I want to make sure I understood, you know, what you mean by shadow public engagement, that we want to make sure we don't create a separate mechanism. What are you thinking about there?
So as Mr. Chair, as part of our environmental review processes, we'll go out and have a scoping comment period. We've got very specific procedures we need to follow around noticing and making sure that the stakeholders in the project area are noticed, and notices around public hearings. So we've got very specific public engagement steps in our process, and I don't think we want to disenfranchise any of the people that are following our process that is embedded in our rules by creating kind of a separate space where a different group has input on the development of that document. So just taking care to ensure that that's not happening.
I see. Thank you. Yeah.
Chair Martin, I have one thing to add here, if this is a good time.
Sure.
Yeah, I apologize that we still haven't been able to get the audio working for our subcommittee member Iwaki, but I did get an email question from him, and he had just asked about the collaborative forums and made a statement that understanding the concerns and developments of the program participants in the collaborative forum is going to be really key to you all as subcommittee members. And his request is can subcommittee members be thoroughly briefed on these collaborative forums and make sure that they're up to speed on what's happening. And I think that's a great point. And absolutely, we were thinking that the collaborative forums, if subcommittee members want to join and listen in directly, that would be fine too. I know your time is limited. So we can also figure out a way to kind of report out to you as subcommittee members and make sure that you're getting that information.
Great. Glad we got at least one contribution from Ben despite the technical problems. Let's see. I'm trying to think, Director Pratt, if there's anything else I should try to flag in this session if we don't have other subcommittee members jumping in. I feel like we had a great discussion.
I saw subcommittee member Forsberg, your hand kind of flickered. It went on and off. So I don't know if you have another comment to add. It sounds like that's not the case. And I can reflect a little bit, and we're not at time. So, members of the public and subcommittee members, if you have other thoughts, please chime in. But, I can give some takeaways by means of wrap up of some of the things I heard here. First of all, acknowledging that this is a starting point, that this is, a complex little pilot program, and we're not going to get everything resolved in one meeting. I think we want to acknowledge, just how important it is, that recruitment piece, and that being open to meeting people where they're at who want to give input to the program. And, maybe they don't have staff capacity as an RGU, but they're kind of curious or they have perspective on it. We're open to taking those calls. And I guess one editorial I'll add is that, we do rely on you all as connected to your communities to help spread the word. We as staff don't always, and the networks that we hold don't always get the word out to everybody. So we really appreciated any added effort, and our doors are open. Sit down and talk to us. That's what this process is about. It's a learning process, and we want to learn from you all. As Chair Martin indicated, next week we'll get more into the nitty gritty of, what do those metrics look like, what kind of type of information, how we're going to use that information. And then, swirling around, I think all these discussions are some of those bigger pieces of those balance points that we've talked about throughout the project, or throughout the process. Even in the months and years leading up to where we are now, how do we balance usable information and people who are saying this information is really important to our communities and to Minnesota, but knowing that there is a time and a cost burden, and how do we balance that? And what is the role of environmental review within all of this, which is, again, environmental review occupies sort of a particular niche, and that is our scope, and we can't solve all the world's problems as much as I would like to. So those are some takeaways from me, but I would encourage anyone else or Chair Martin for you to add.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. I'm not great at sort of chairing and taking notes and remembering which takeaways I wanted to mention. So I think, a lot of what you talked about there, Katie, are some of the things that jumped out to me. I know that we came back. So I guess one thing I heard was no strenuous objections to the basic design that Director Wilson laid out, or things that are missing from the sort of design of the project recruitment process, ways of getting the word out. So that was good to hear. I did hear, some, and you referred to this as well, some need for more thinking about how do we balance transparency with that safe space idea, and the desire to have, participants only be the folks that are actually working on EAWs, with the recognition that there might be some people that really want to have input to the process, but don't have an EAW and don't have a lot of resources to sort of, send people to it. Could there be other entities involved, or if not, what other ways could we get input, meaningful input from those folks? So those things I think are important. And then, as you said, also, and as Member Conor Steedberg said, just keeping a clear sense of, this is a pretty focused effort. What are we trying to do? And that it's not the environmental review process overall, of course. I also appreciated Ms. Voss' comment that, keeping in mind we're not sort of blaming climate for all the problems that might be in the environmental review process, as if the addition of this climate information triggered all sorts of things. I think that's a fair point. There's a lot that's beyond our scope in this project. And we do have in my mind, a fairly focused charge of saying, like, now that we have decided to ask for these two types of climate information, how can we make that job as easy as possible for the project proposers and RGUs to get meaningful information of both kinds? So those are some things I heard. I don't have to be the last one to talk, though. So if there's anything else that other subcommittee members jumped out and you want to sort of bring back to the front, that would be fine.
Dr. Martin, I think it's important that we have representative participation from around the entire state. And that may require some innovation in order to do that in the smaller rural counties and areas. I think today was an excellent discussion, really. And I think some of this discussion, I wish some of this discussion had taken place at the full EQB board. The revised EAW board package came to the board and then it left the board, and it was very little discussion of this sort. I think this was a very good discussion. I think if our next meeting is focused on metrics, who's going to develop the draft of those metrics? And are we going to be able to provide input to a draft of those metrics before the next meeting?
Subcommittee member Forsberg, Denise, I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit. Our next meeting is coming up December 9th, which is a week from Thursday. So we have a little bit of a tight window that we're working with. Definitely we'll put together, Denise, and correct me if I'm wrong, we'll put together at least some starting points for that. Excuse me, I have a tickle in my throat. But by all means, we're open to suggestions, and we'll try to get that over to you as soon as possible. Denise, what else can you say about the logistics here before the next meeting?
Thank you, Executive Director Pratt. And yes, I will commit to trying, I do have ideas and suggestions, but what might be helpful to me is to be responsive to, again, I put together a draft proposal, not as an indicator of right or wrong, or to take a vote on that particular framework, but to have the conversation that we had today, which is, what changes can we make in order to help make sure and ensure this is a fair, good, and transparent process. And I think we've walked away with a lot of good ideas. And so I'll take that away and try to do the same for the meeting on the 9th. And like I said, I have ideas, but Subcommittee Member Forsberg, if you have ideas, please feel free to reach out, and I will do my best to sort of include those in the draft proposal so that the whole subcommittee can then deliberate on those ideas.
Yes, thank you, Denise. I do have some ideas, and I think it would be good if other committee members too, if they have some ideas, could submit them to you.
Mhm.
I'm asking other subcommittee members to submit ideas to you. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so that's an invitation to all of us to give Denise ideas if we can before the next meeting. Okay, if there's no other sort of wrap-up comments, I think we can adjourn early. Remind people on the committee that the next meeting is December 9th, 2 to 4 p.m. Same place. Any other wrap-up comments I need to make, Katie, or anything you want to add?
No, I think that's good. I'm looking to my team whether that meeting is up on our website yet, but if it's not, it is. So the meeting for the 9th, for those of you who are joining in, we already have meeting information posted on our website. You can find us there. Was also in the EQB monitor, we're putting out notices for the meeting. And again, feel free to contact us if you have any questions, both logistical or about the content of the subcommittee. We appreciate your input and your attention to this.
Great. Well, thank you again, everyone, for your time. Thanks to the subcommittee. Oh, Denise, sorry, everyone, one other thing.
I was just going to say that the next steps from here will be to take, we took a lot of notes today, and then we're going to further refine sort of the framework and proposal. And then from this meeting and on December 9th, and that we'll be coming back in January to an ARIS meeting, I believe. And then that's when we'll sort of roll out the full proposal. So there will be another chance to weigh in on sort of the construct and framework for how we're going to design and implement the pilot program beyond just today. But we will use the information we heard today to refine that proposal.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks to everyone. Thanks to the committee members for serving, and to all the members of the public for sharing your feedback with us. Hope you will continue to do so. And I think with that, we're adjourned. I don't think we need like a motion, right? We're not so formal in this committee.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you.